Almost 5 years after Hurricane Harvey devastated the Texas coast, we're still arguing over how federal money should be distributed. When will this dispute end? We'll ask Congressman Al Green. Dallas ISD's new superintendent is a familiar face. Stephanie Elizalde is leaving Austin to return to the city where she already climbed the ranks as an administrator. Trustee Joyce Foreman on why the district is looking to its past to build its future. Also, even with record-breaking high temperatures across Texas, ERCOT expresses great confidence in the electric grid. But after last week's call for conservation and the 2021 failure, should we believe it? And will either Beto or Abbott pivot to the middle to try to win more independents in the general election? Political consultant Matt Makoviak with some predictions this morning.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning, everybody. I'm Teresa Woodard in for Jason Whiteley today. Let's begin with a few headlines. First, a census undercount cost Texas a congressional seat. The state did gain 2 new seats, but could have gained 3. That is according to the U.S. Census Bureau, which said the 2020 census likely undercounted the state's population by roughly 500,000 residents. Texas only needed 189,000 to gain that 3rd seat. Ahead of the census, Republican state leaders refused to approve funding to publicize the census, which proponents said would have helped secure a more accurate count. Almost all of us are dealing with soaring property appraisals every year. The Senate Finance Committee will hold hearings next week to look at ways to try to reduce Texans' property tax burden. A $24 billion budget surplus is projected to be available in January. But because of spending limits, the state cannot use much of that to lower property taxes without some sort of action by lawmakers or voters. The baby formula shortage continues to cause real pain for a lot of Texas families. But the White House did make several big moves last week to try to help. President Biden invoked the Defense Production Act, so key ingredients for formula are now prioritized, meaning suppliers have to ship ingredients to formula manufacturers before they ship to other customers. The president also asked the Defense Department to enlist commercial planes to speed up imports of formula from other countries. That program is called Operation Fly Formula. It has been almost 5 years since Hurricane Harvey caused catastrophic flooding that destroyed homes and killed more than 100 people. After all of this time, there is still bickering over how federal disaster funds are being distributed. Harris County, and Houston specifically, suffered immense damage. But reporting from the Texas Tribune shows they are poised to get less federal disaster relief money than areas far from the coast. We are asking Congressman Al Green what he's doing to solve this problem. He is a Democrat from Houston. He is on the House Financial Services Committee and chairs its Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee.
Good morning, Congressman Green. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. It's an honor to be with you.
This is funding that Congress approved, meaning you approved it. So what went wrong?
Well, it's become a disaster. The disaster relief plan has become a disaster in and of itself, which is quite regrettable because there are people who are still suffering. Houston, Harris County, over 1 trillion gallons of water. It was the epicenter. Yet one of the plans actually zeroed out Houston, zeroed out Harris County. And then in a subsequent plan, not based on per capita damage, but based on percentage of damage, allowed places that were inland, some 200 plus miles inland, to receive more money than the areas that were at the epicenter of Hurricane Harvey. This is just unacceptable. And I regret that GLO has taken this position because HUD has extended the hand of friendship to GLO in an effort to get GLO to sit and let's talk through this and come to an amiable, amicable decision about how these funds should be allocated. But GLO has not done this.
When you talk about GLO, that of course is the General Land Office. Has your office reached out? Have you tried to talk to them about the methodology that they've used? Have you gotten any answers?
Well, I've done more than reach out. We've had hearings here in Washington, D.C. That I chaired, and we had in Houston, sort of inquiry. We've looked into this extensively, and we've had persons from GLO to appear, and we've made our views known. But here is the problem. We send this money to the states, And when the money gets to the states then decide how it will matriculate to the various subsets of that given state. And in Texas, once the money gets to Texas, unfortunately, we lose a lot of the authority that we want to have in causing people who are suffering to get the money. And this is not just peculiar to this circumstance. It's happened with money that was for education, not spent as we assumed it would be. But I want to commend the Texas Tribune because their reporting on this has exposed it.
So what can be done? Is there any chance of a federal investigation or a complaint to HUD to try to relieve this disparity?
I don't believe HUD has indicated that this is the end. The process allows HUD to approve a plan preliminarily. Once you start to execute that plan, if that plan in some way breaches HUD guidelines, then HUD can come back, step back in and take an action against the state itself. So we're waiting to see this plan as they proceed to implement it. And if we see the invidious discrimination taking place that appears to be taking place because the poor and people of color along these coastal areas, and we intended for the people who were suffering to get the money. But if you decide that you're going to take it from the poor and the people of color and send it to areas that where you don't have a lot of people of color, then I think there's reason for HUD to continue with this, and I think HUD will. That money was not sent to Texas so that it could be distributed to people who were not impacted by the hurricane.
Is the process flawed? Because it sounds like there's just no real federal oversight once these dollars are given to the state. So do you believe that the process needs to be overhauled in some way? Yes, I do.
Absolutely. You are eminently correct. We have to overhaul the process. And I'm looking into that myself, the process, the possibility of overhauling this process. I also have a bill that would help us to fast track this money that has been pending in the Senate. And my hope is that we can tweak that legislation and put in some sort of clawback provision such that if a state declines to adhere to the intentionality of Congress, we can claw that back, claw the funds back and hold on to those funds. We should not allow states to receive funds and then disregard what Congress intended.
Still a long road to recovery ahead. All right, Congressman Green, we really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you, sir.
Well, I thank you very much because what you're doing will help us to make sure that those who are suffering will get some help that they need. Thank you.
Hot temperatures are nothing unusual in Texas, and it has been hotter than normal in May. But ERCOT already asked Texas to conserve because 6 power plants unexpectedly went down. After that call for conservation, and with last year's grid failure still fresh on our minds, when state officials say they are confident in the grid's reliability, should we believe them? Let's go to Ian Mitra, the senior managing editor at the Texas Tribune. All right, Ian, so should we have faith in this grid?
That was certainly the message that was coming this week from state officials that oversee the the state's main power grid operator. And so the idea that they were getting across was that there is more power in storage. They've got more power plants set up. They're really trying to conserve, but their idea of conservation too is that it's a good thing. They just want to make sure people are conserving. They say that we are squared away for the summer, and that they're saying extreme confidence. Now, of course, with what this state has gone through last year, there's still going to be some concern about that, particularly with another hot Texas summer on board.
Absolutely. I think there's PTSD from what happened in the winter, and let's cross our fingers that it doesn't happen in the summer because that would be really difficult for us. Right. Let's talk about that census undercount here in Texas. The Census Bureau does estimate it missed more than 500,000 Texans. We know we lost out on an additional congressional seat, but what else did we miss out on?
Yeah, this is really an important thing, the inaccurate census count, because there's so many things. You mentioned the congressional district seat. There's also just federal funding at stake, and so there are things that federal funding is based on regards to these population numbers related to things that go towards education, potentially like early childhood programs. It goes to funding for roads and a number of things. So that's why when the Census Bureau kind of does this post analysis study, they are trying to get as an accurate count to see if what they missed, but that's money that Texans could miss out on.
Yeah, left on the table. All right, Ion, stick around. We'll see you again in just a few minutes. Next on Inside Texas Politics, Dallas ISD trustee Joyce Foreman on hiring a new superintendent who much of the state already knows, and what Foreman plans to do about Governor Abbott's support of school vouchers. And political consultant Matt Mackowiak offers up a prediction for the runoff in the Republican Attorney General's race. And if you want to keep up with Texas politics during the week, you should subscribe to our podcast. It's called Y'all-itics. New content, fresh interviews. Episodes drop every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. The state's second largest school district, among the largest in the nation, just chose a new leader. Stephanie Elizalde is leaving Austin ISD to return to Dallas ISD, where she's already been an administrator. Dallas ISD board trustee Joyce Foreman says institutional knowledge mattered in making this hire. Now, she is also gearing up to fight school vouchers in the next legislative session. Trustee Foreman represents District 6 in Southwest Dallas.
Good morning to you, Ms. Foreman. Thank you so much for your time.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
This is a difficult time in public education. There is learning loss because of COVID. There are controversies over how to teach and what to teach. So in your opinion, what makes Stephanie Elizalde the right person to lead DISD right now?
Well, I actually came on the Dallas School Board in 2014. And at that time, Mike Miles was the superintendent of schools and had 40 low-performing schools. So Dr. Elizalde came to work in the district, and she reduced those schools to 4 low-performing schools. I think that Dr. Elizalde will be able to help move student achievement. She also had an opportunity to work with us on the whole equity issue and how equity really looks. And I think she'll bring some new insight into that.
Teacher recruitment, teacher retention is a real problem across the state of Texas. So what would you like to see from Dr. Elizalde when it comes to recruiting and retaining teachers at DISD?
Well, I think one of the things that I've been really vocal about is the teachers are coming in, but we're really looking at tenure. I certainly believe in rewarding them on performance, but tenure is going to have a big piece. I also want to look at alternative certification to make sure we're really making sure that we're doing our very best to bring in bright people who might be teachers through our alternative certification process, and also looking at other avenues that might be new to us that would bring in teachers.
So Governor Abbott made news in the last week or two with support for a voucher program. That has pretty much traditionally had lukewarm support in the state of Texas. What do you think a voucher program would do to DISD?
Well, when you look at a student population, that's about 88% poverty rate. Where would those students go? When you look at voucher programs, vouchers don't really pay the full amount of the tuition. And I don't believe we should be taking money out of public education. I would tell those parents who are in private school and don't want to pay the dollars, there are many choices in public schools that they would probably really like if they just take a look at.
You as a member of the Board of Trustees, and would you anticipate that Dr. Elizalde, perhaps the superintendent, would fight this type of a plan in Austin during the next legislative session?
Well, I haven't had that conversation with Dr. Elizalde, so I don't want to speak for her. But as an official, I have no problem with being very vocal about things I'm passionate about. Vouchers do not help the masses of children.
Trustee Joyce Foreman, thank you so much for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Tuesday is Election Day in Texas, the Democratic and Republican primary runoffs. We are closely watching that Republican Attorney General race between Ken Paxton and challenger George P. Bush. Matt Mackowiak is with us to give us his prediction. There's also a race on the ballot he thinks is a toss-up. Mackowiak is a Republican consultant.
Matt, thank you so much for being with us. We sure appreciate your time this morning.
Pleasure.
So I think most eyes are going to be on that Republican Attorney General's race. So tell us what you're expecting.
Yeah, I think most observers that look at this believe that the incumbent, Ken Paxton, our Attorney General, will be renominated. I think you might see a 60-40 margin ultimately. You have to remember our statewide primary runoffs are a subset of a subset. It really is kind of the base of the base. And George P. Bush, the land commissioner who's been challenging Attorney General Paxton, has been trying to make arguments on ethics, on performance. And it just doesn't appear that those arguments are gaining traction.
Let's talk about the Democratic side of that ballot. Do you think that either Joe Jaworski or Rochelle Garza, does either potentially have more strength to mount a really strong general campaign in November?
Well, I think Democrats want to run against Paxton. I think they believe that they can make the race competitive. Now, the overall environment is going to contribute to whether that's possible or not. It certainly looks like it's going to be a Republican year. The question is going to be, can they raise enough money to give themselves a chance to defeat a Republican incumbent in a Republican year? And what we will also be looking for is to see whether the kind of arguments that George P. Bush has been making on ethics, whether those work in a general election once those arguments are made by the Democratic nominee.
Besides the Attorney General's race, we have some congressional races, also the Democratic Lieutenant Governor runoff. So what else are you going to be closely watching?
Yeah, I mean, you have, like you said, the Democratic Lieutenant Governor runoff between the candidate last time, Mike Collier, accountant from Houston, former, I believe, finance chair of the Texas Democratic Party, and a former state rep, or I guess a current state rep named Michelle Beckley from the DFW area. I'm kind of surprised in the Dallas Morning News UT Tyler poll from earlier this week. Both of those candidates were really well below 50%. So that shows there's a very high undecided number if that polling is even close to accurate. So I think that's a toss-up. Collier has the advantage of having run statewide before. I really think the AG race is really the only major race apart from governor that the Democrats truly believe they have a chance to make competitive. I don't believe the governor's race will be competitive in the final analysis, but the Attorney General's race is going to be more competitive than any other statewide race if Paxton's nominated.
Let's talk about that governor's race. Looking ahead to November, polling indicates it looks like Greg Abbott is going to have the tightest race maybe of his career. Yet we have not seen any sort of pivot to the middle to court the independents. So is that something that Republicans just do not need to do anymore in the state of Texas?
Great question. Look, we're not quite in the general election yet, right? The primary runoff's going on. You have these other candidates that are running. The governor's focused on doing his job. He's been focused on border security and these other issues. Except that Texas is a Republican state, Beto needs to move to the middle much more than Greg Abbott does. And so far, Beto really hasn't meaningfully done that.
5.5 months to go. All right, Matt, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Will there be any surprises on Tuesday? We'll discuss that on the Roundtable next. It is time now for Reporters Roundtable, where we kind of put the headlines in perspective. We have Ian from the Texas Tribune back with us. Thank you for sticking around a little bit, Ian.
Sure.
Also joining us each week is Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Good morning to you, Bud.
Good morning.
Good to see you. And Bernadine Steptoe, our political producer at WFAA in Dallas. Good morning, Bernadine.
Good morning.
All right, so let's start with talking about Election Day. That is Tuesday in the state of Texas. For nearly 30 years, it feels like the Republican primary and the runoff really do decide exactly who's going to run the state of Texas. So any surprises on the horizon, Ian?
Well, on Tuesday, there's a short list of runoffs that we'll see, and obviously the AG's race is at the top of the list, particularly between Ken Paxton and George P. Bush. It's really hard. This is going to be a group of the most ardent supporters of either party voting in. So, it looks like Attorney General Paxton is in pretty good shape looking ahead. And, we'll see what happens also with it. One of the most watched races on the Democratic side is the congressional runoff between incumbent Henry Cuellar and his challenger, Jessica Cisneros. That one will be a close one.
Yeah. All right, Bud, what are you watching for? And do you think there might be any surprises?
Well, this is what we're down to. We have 2% of the state has voted the Republican primary, another 1% of the Democratic primary. So nobody's voting. The voters will be just the most ardent diehards in either party. As far as Republican Party, the suspense is down to whether Sarah Stogner is going to be able to overthrow Wayne Christian. And that's a real long shot. There's just no drama in this runoff.
No drama. I understand that. All right. Well, we kind of like no drama sometimes. Maybe drama in politics is a little more interesting. Bernadine, let's talk to you about this. What do you think? Is the GOP going to keep that stronghold in the state of Texas?
Absolutely. And I think that especially with the low turnout, what's going to be just as important as usually is the turnout. Those candidates are going to have to get support if they're going to win. There'll be no surprises. There is just a process, and we'll just see what happens and gear up for November.
Gear up for
That's,
November.
I think, where the focus now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. All right. So inflation is up. The president's approval ratings are down. And then you kind of have this wild card. We don't know the future of Roe versus Wade. So could that have any impact when we look ahead towards November? What do you think, Ion? Talk about it. Are Democrats stronger or weaker going into November?
I think all of the things you listed are going to be factors too. And also, let's not forget, this is a midterm election. That's not usually, it's always a challenge for the party in the White House, as well as the aspect too that, in Texas too, we had redistricting. And so a lot of the political districts have been redrawn. Obviously, Republicans are in power, so that's the map looks very strong for them. So obviously, we'll have to see where things are with inflation, but certainly the issues you mentioned are going to be certainly on top of mind for voters.
Yeah. So Bud, looking ahead, you think Democrats are stronger, weaker?
It was always going to be a terrible year for Democrats because of the midterm of Democratic presidency. They're looking at some real long shots going into the fall. We'll be looking at whether Rochelle Garza can win an attorney general's race if she gets through the primary runoff. We will be looking at Luke Warford for Railroad Commission. There'll just be these little notes down the ballot of, can the Democrats break through anywhere up and down? They're all a long shot. Democrats would be a lot better off if Kiki Friedman were running this year.
Bernadine, quickly, do you think the Democrats can break through anywhere?
We'll see, but it doesn't look as if they'll be able to, because it is a Republican state, and the Republicans will hold on to whatever they have.
All right, there you have it. Thank you guys so much, and thank you for watching. Have a great Sunday, everybody.